Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the second video of the course. On this one, we're going to be talking about Ableton Live. So you finally, let's say, decided on using Ableton, you downloaded it, you installed it, and then you're firing up for the first time. Now, if you're not there yet, if you're still kind of considering the additions, like which one should you get? Like I said, always I would say you can start with the light version that comes with the MIDI controller that you bought or the audio interface. If not, there's also the intro and the standard and then the suite. As you can see, the standard, the suite, they're both full featured versions. So if you can afford the standard, I would say go with that. If you can get the suite, that's even better. But if we take a quick look over here, we can see like the difference between all these is that the intro is just limited, but all of the main features that you would need to getting started with making music is actually there. So no harm in starting with that and see how you like Ableton, and then you can keep an eye out for, sales and whatnot to upgrade later to the standard or the suite. So quick overview, we got the software instruments, kind of the main difference. We got 8, 13, and 20. The packs, those are just like sound packs, which you can also get them like somewhere else. There's always like music producers that are given theirs at a discount price or sometimes even free. Samples, loops, and all that, same deal. Audio effects, we're talking 27 instead of 42 and 58. It's still gonna have the most like basic ones like that you need to kind of get started. Well, I don't want to say basic. I would say like the essential ones that you need, like the reverb, the delay, and all that stuff, compressors and EQ. MIDI effects, same thing. We're not talking a big difference here. MIDI tools, honestly, I'm not sure what that is, but nothing that you're going to need for this course. Like you can still make great tracks with just the intro. The biggest limitation, I would say, when it comes to intro, because as you can see here, it's got everything that the standard and the suite has, I would say is when it comes to tracks, which is the audio and the MIDI tracks, because those can like, having limited amounts can stop you from like adding more layers to your beat or to your music. So as you can see here, the standard and the suite, it's unlimited, but then the intro is 16, and I believe the light version is like 8, so not very much. I mean, we're talking about, drums, bass, keys, and vocals, but even with the drums, a lot of times you want to separate the kick from the snare, so like you need more tracks there. I would say that's really the most important like limitation to consider, but other than that, you should be able to get going with whatever one that you can get your hands on. All right. And then so moving on to Ableton. All right, the first time you install Ableton and you fire it up, you're probably going to see a demo track. And over there, you can kind of play with it. You can tinker around. You can probably see, okay, how can I, like this is the bass, this is the keyboards, whatever it is. You can kind of play with that, just review, see how a track would look like when you record it. But if not, you can always go to File, and a new live set, and then you'll get something like this. This is a blank paper ready for you to start recording and creating music. By default, I believe it does start with 2 MIDI tracks and 2 audio tracks, which we'll talk about these in just a little bit. So the first thing you're going to need to do is go to preferences. So if you go there, I'm not going to go over every single thing, just mostly the important stuff. You can always use Ableton Live documentation on their website if you're curious about a specific setting. But the most important thing is setting our audio devices. So right now I have a Vault 2 connected. So if you have a Scarlett or UAD or whatever it is, audio interface that you're using, this is where you're going to set it for the input and the output. And then down here, I would say for the sample rate, always go with 48,000. This is kind of the standard high quality sample. So even if you like want to score for TV and film, they're gonna ask for 48,000 sample rate. Make sure this is toggled on high quality. And then we have latency, which is the buffer size. With this one, it's basically how long does it take for the CPU to process the audio input and then for you to hear it back. And the smaller the sample, the faster it is going to be. So you're not going to notice the latency that much, but it puts a big load on your CPU. And obviously the bigger the sample that you make, is going to be easier on your CPU. It's going to give it a little bit more time, but you're going to start noticing the latency more and more. Now, the lower the buffer size, although because it's going to be adding more load on your CPU, you're going to start hearing some glitches and some, like, I don't know, distortion in the audio, hearing it back. So that means it's too much for the CPU. Start in the middle. Start with 256 if your computer sounds good and you're not hearing it or noticing a delay. I would say stick with that. I think I started on my old Mac with 512 and that still worked totally fine. With this one, I have an M1, I'm using 256 and it works just great. And then if you go up to the first tab, this is just the look and feel. This is where you can kind of change the theme of Ableton. You can go with the light or mid-light, mid-dark, dark, or even the classic Live 9 look. I usually just like mid-dark. And then the zoom display. So this is at 100%. If you want to increase it, you can kind of zoom in on the tracks. So totally your preference, whatever you like, or whatever works for you. And the next thing I would say, to go to file folder, and you can turn off the create analysis file. You're not really gonna need that. So if it's on, just make sure that it's off. It's just extra files on your system that you don't really need. And then moving to plugins, this is where you can kind of, if you have any plugins that you download, like VSTs or virtual instruments, basically, this is where you kind of set it. If you want to set a custom folder for them or not, this is where you can set it up. And then on this tab, the record, warp, and launch. The only thing that I would say change is the auto warp long samples. And all what that does is basically warping is Ableton's way trying to fit an audio sample in the grid based on your BPM, like your beats per minute. So with that, I would say set it to off. You can always warp it later if you really need to. And I would say that's pretty much it for the settings. Once you have that done, then you're good to go. Now, as you look over here, the most important, I would say, box would be this one right here. It's called the info view, because what it is anything that you hover your mouse over is going to tell you what that thing does. So right here, as you can see, stop button, play button, arrangement record button. So that means arrangement record button. That means it's only going to record on this view right here. Speaking of which, Ableton has two views, which really you don't see in other DAWs. And is that Ableton has this view right here, which is called arrangement view. And it also has this view, which is called the session view. Now, the session view, you kind of record clips. Those are called clips. And basically, if you have one recorded here, one recorded here, if you click on this is called scenes. So you click on scene 1, it's going to play anything that's recorded on the first row. If you click on scene 2, then it's going to play any clips that are recorded on the second, and so on and so forth. But this is mostly for performances, like if you want to perform live, or if you want to do some beat sketches, because it's kind of like, okay, I like to do my intro on the first row. I'm going to do a little intro with this clip, and then moving on to the second scene, or like the verse 1, like you can have the beats, or you can have the drums come in or something like that. That's mostly it. But the more traditional way of recording that you'll see with most DAWs is arrangement view. With this one, you have tracks on each row, and you're just going to record and layer your recordings with each track. Now, some of the most important things to know at the top, you can, as we talked about, we got the play, stop, and record. This one, this record button is going to record things over here. And then if you go to the session view, you got this record button, which is going to record the clips. And then this button right here is called the follow button. And what that does is, if you have a long recording and as you're playing or recording, instead of staying fixed in on these bars and this grid, it's basically going to follow the playhead as it keeps going to the right. And then on this side of things, we have the BPM, which is kind of basically like how fast your song is going to be. And then you have the metronome over here. So if you enable this, basically is going to give you that metronome to kind of keep time as you're recording. If we hit play, you'll be able to hear it. And then for the BPM, you can kind of set it however you want. Let's say this is by default it's 120, but you can do like 80 if you want. Or if you're like you have a beat or a rhythm in your head and you're like, oh, I kind of like this feel right here, you can tap. So I can do like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. So that basically now is set the BPM to that tap sequence that you just basically tapped on that button. In this case, it's 100.75. At this point, I know it's about 100, so we don't have to deal with decimals. So that's that right there. And then on this side, the most important thing I would say, this one right here, I would say is the looping. So if you look over here, you have this little selector, and this is just tells you what it's gonna loop. This is the loop region. So you can kind of expand it this way. So now basically we're saying we're gonna loop anything from 1 to 16 bar, and then you can kind of just change the size of it, the size of that region, and how much you want to loop. These two buttons right here, these are mostly for recording. This is where you punch in the loop record. And so, for example, if we have it over here starting on the 13th, if I put this right here and then punch that in, and then I'll set this one over here, and then this is the punch out. If I'm recording on this track, let's say from the beginning, anyway, from here to here, anything I'm playing is not going to record. It's only going to record once this punch-in marker happens, and it's going to record over here. And then if I keep playing, it's going to stop recording right here, and then nothing gets recorded on this side of the region. So that's the main thing with these. And then on this side, we have a few things. One of them, this is the pencil for drawing MIDI. So we have a MIDI track right here. So if I double click right here, I'm gonna create an empty MIDI clip. And if I toggle this on, now I can actually draw my MIDI notes and just play things this way. That's one way of, recording MIDI. You can do it using the pencil just by drawing it in, or you can use the a MIDI controller and record that way as well. Now, the next button over here, this is called the computer MIDI keyboard. So if you, let's say, don't have a MIDI controller with you, let's say you're on a laptop, you're traveling, but you still want to make beats, you still want to make music in Ableton and record. If you toggle this on, then it's going to turn your regular keyboard into a MIDI controller. The best way to do this, let's say, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to load in an instrument. So instrument rack. Let's go to piano. I'm just going to do a grand piano on this track right here. So by having this enabled, now I can basically play piano on my regular computer keyboard. And if I turn it off, then my keyboard doesn't make any music anymore. And then this one right here is called the kitty. And this one right here is called the key MIDI, not kitty, the key MIDI switch. And this one right here is for mapping keys on your keyboard to control some of the buttons on the DAW itself. For example, if I have this, if I enable this, now it's showing me all the things that I can map and control. For example, if I want to, let's say, for the record, I want it to that when I push the R on my keyboard to start recording. And as you can see here, it already mapped the key for the letter R to that button. So if I turn this off and I push R on my keyboard, it's gonna start recording. So let's go ahead and delete that. So that's what that thing does. And this one is for MIDI mapping for MIDI controllers. So this one is key mapping for keyboards, and this one is for MIDI controllers. So now with this one, if I want, like on this bright knob right here, I can select that, and then I'm going to use this knob on my MIDI keyboard to control it. So by moving that, it's already registered that knob to this knob on the DAW. So if I turn it off, and now I can just control it just like that using the MIDI keyboard. Let's go ahead and take this one off too, because we don't need to. All right, so now coming down here, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have MIDI tracks, and we also have audio tracks. Now MIDI tracks are gonna need like virtual instruments, like this piano that we just pulled into here. And in order to play that piano, you can, in order to record and play that piano, you can use your MIDI controller that way. Now with audio tracks, those are for recording like vocals and instruments using a microphone. As you can see here, as I'm talking, it's showing that it's getting a signal from channel 1 on my audio interface for my microphone. The most important things to know here is that these are record enable buttons. Basically, when I record enable this, that means when I click record, it's going to record on this track only, since these are not enabled. And if I enable this one, then this is the one that I'm going to record into. And the next one would be the S, which is for solo. If I just want to hear this track, I can solo it. And so that way I can only hear this. I can also hold command, and let's say I want to solo both of these, so I can only hear these two. So that's one way to do it. And this one right here is activate or deactivate the track. Let's say if I'm just using this track for sketching, and then, okay, I got kind of the main idea down, and I start recording. The big idea is and I don't need to sketch this anymore. I can always turn it off this way. And this one right here, this is the volume. So if I want to increase the volume on this track, I can do it from here. Double clicking on it will always reset it back to 0. And then over here, you'll see that this one has got all instruments. So basically, it's telling you that the input for this is going to be an instrument from here. And then the input for the audio tracks is going to be an external input, which is going to be the audio interface. So this audio track has got the input coming in from the channel 1 on the audio interface, and this one is coming in from channel 2. So if I have an instrument plugged into here, this is where it's going to record that. And then as you can see for the output, everything is going to the master. Like this one is going to the master, and then if I drag something else into this one, as soon as I drag an instrument to it, then it's going to set it to the master. So all of these tracks are all going to go to the master. That's going to be the one final track that everything feeds into. And what we're listening right now, we're listening to all the signal that's going through to the master. And then you might be wondering, what about these two tracks right here? They're called a reverb and a delay, A and B. Those are what are called our send tracks. And what these do is that if I want, let's say, this track and this track to have reverb on them, but I don't want to add like a reverb plugin on this one and this one. If I just want them both to have the same amount of reverb and settings and all that, it's a way to basically handle the reverb on multiple tracks. So I can have this one sending to this reverb right here, and this one sending to the reverb too. And then now you can control like how much you want to send to it. So depending on how much reverb you want on each one of those tracks, you can kind of control that over here. And then for the delay is going to be the same thing. So now having this is going also to the delay, and then this one also go into the delay. It might be an easier way to actually see this if we move on to the other view, which is the session view. So you'll see right here we have send A and send B on both of these tracks, and these are A and B. Those are the tracks they're going to go to. So if I click on this, you'll see it's got a reverb plugin already loaded, and then on the delay, it's got a delay plugin already loaded on here. And then so you can control how much you want reverb on this track, how much of it you want it to go to this reverb track, and then how much delay you want it to go to the delay track. And then both of these are bounced to the master. So in the master, you're going to just hear the final signal of that audio chain. So if I'm recording on, let's say, this audio track right here, the audio is really going from my voice to the mic to the audio interface. And then from the audio interface is going into Ableton Live. And then if I add, let's say, reverb to it, then from that track is going to go to this track. And then from this track is going to go to the master. So that's kind of basically the whole flow of my audio signal going all the way to the master. Now let's go back here. So enough of those tracks. If you want to add tracks, you can always do Command T, that will add an audio track. And if you do Command Shift T, that will add a MIDI track if you want to use the keyboard shortcuts. You can always right click on an empty spot and you can insert an audio track, a MIDI track, or a return track, which is the same as these. All right, now moving on from these tracks to this side of the application, which is the browser. This is what's called the browser. This is where you can browse sounds, you can browse instruments, plugins, audio effects, MIDI effects, samples, and then you can also have all of these custom folders for your samples. So for example, right here, I have my Splice folder. This is any sample that I download that I get from Splice, then it's gonna basically be going to that folder right there. So Splice, that's gonna have the samples that I get from Splice, and samples is basically sample packs that I download from, other producers or other websites. For example, Cymatics, you can see all the Cymatics samples in here, decap, etc. And then I would say after that, the most important thing is sounds over here. These are sounds that came with Ableton. So again, like sample packs. Any sample packs that you download from Ableton, they're going to show up here. And then we have drums. So with drums, those are like all different drum kits. You can kind of preview them by clicking on them. And this one right here is how you can like turn off that preview. So if you like this drum kit, then at that point you can drag it into a MIDI track. So let's go ahead and put it in here. And now you can see we got this 16 square grid for all the different elements of that drum kit. So this one right here is the bass drum, and then rim shot. And then you can also, I think because we have the delay on, let's turn that off. Okay, there we go. Then the rim shot, the snare drum. So, and then at that point, you can use your MIDI controller to control these. And then you can kind of like record your drum groove that way. And then you can modify all the different tones and stuff of the kit using these knobs if you want to. If you don't want this, so let's go ahead and delete that. Let's say this is not the one that I want. You can kind of drag different drum kit, or you can drag an empty drum rack, and basically it's all empty. And at that point, if you want to create your own like drum kit based on samples that you downloaded, then you can go ahead and, for example, let's say, I'll go to Cymatics Trap Starter. We're gonna go to the drums one shots because so those are just one shots. It's not a looped drum. Let's take a kick. So let's say we like this kick. We're gonna drag it over here. And then let's say I want a snare. So there you go. I like this snare right here. So now we have the kick and the snare that we like, and then we can use our keyboard or MIDI keyboard to control this. Just like that. So again, you can use like pre-made drum kits, or you can make your own in this way that I just showed you. Instruments, those are all like MIDI instruments, so virtual instruments if you want to call them. And simply by just drag and drop into a MIDI track, and you should be able to use them. Audio effects, this is where you can use like compressors, EQs, and all that stuff. That's where you're gonna find these things. So for example, EQ, we can take that EQ, let's say EQ8. This is the one that I usually use. I'm gonna put it on this grand piano, and if I wanna like take out the lows, and then if I wanna up the highs, that's how you can do it. So this is where you're gonna find all the audio effects, and then this one where you're gonna find the MIDI effects. If you want to control velocity or whatnot, that's where you'll find it. Max for Life, don't bother with this right now. It's kind of like for next level things if you want to create some max effects or instruments. And then we have the plugins. Those are the third-party plugins that I talked about earlier that you can download, like the native instruments, the output, and all that stuff. When you download them, then you'll find them in here. Now, there's like 3 different versions of virtual instruments. You have the audio unit, the VST, and VST3s. The most common one is the VST3, and then the audio unit is more for Macs. So this is what, if you use a Mac, then that's what I'd recommend using. And that's pretty much it. Anything, the rest of these, like you can dabble into them if you want. So samples, so we talked about that. There's more samples here. Grooves, those are like just basically, you can have a groove, for example. Let's say if I put this on here, then it's gonna, it has a groove that was created like using the MIDI, and anything that you put it on, like let's say right now how I put it on this grand piano, then it's gonna create that groove using the grand piano. It's kind of good for if you're like kind of want to get inspired and make something new with a new groove instead of your typical groove that you use. So this is pretty much it for the overview of the software. I think by now you should be able to feel comfortable knowing what everything does and to get started with recording your music. Next, we're going to start with actually recording and start working on our musical piece, and we'll go over basically the recording of the MIDI, the recording of audio, and some of the effects that we're going to use and add on it, and how to arrange all that stuff. So if you like all this so far, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you get notified of the future videos of this course. And the most important thing is that keep making music and stay inspired. I'll see you on the next video. Peace.